So once again, for you guys, this is part of my what you call do-it-yourself loan modification course, educational purposes only. I'll let the attorney give his little disclaimers before we get into the Q&A part of this course. So without further ado, attorney, tell us a little bit about your background and as a real estate attorney and as an investor.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been a real estate attorney for 30 years, since 1991. Been a real estate investor a little shorter time period than that. About 2 years into my attorney career, I decided that I wanted some sort of passive income because, you know, even though I charge a lot an hour, it's still trading hours for dollars, you know. So you got to have a system where you have income coming in passive, you know, when you're ready to retire. Otherwise, you see these attorneys in their 80s practicing law.
Okay. So how long have you been in the investment side of things?
About 27 years, 28 years.
And an attorney for almost about 30 years, you said, roughly?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. What is your expert opinion about the current housing market, and do you see a correction forthcoming in the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months?
Good question. Well, you know, if I was a soothsayer, I would say that this year, 2021, will be no different than last year. I think status quo, we've got very low inventory everywhere in the United States, and therefore, you know, demand is there and it's forcing prices up dramatically. You see it a lot, you know, people watching, I'm sure you've seen a situation where you put a bid on a house and got outbid by $20,000, or you put a house on the market and people overbid the price to get it because there's so few properties for sale. So that'll continue. The question is, what happens next? There's two factors that could change supply and demand. Changing demand would be interest rates. So all this borrowing we're doing now, these trillions and trillions of dollars from China, it has to force interest rates up eventually, because logic says that when you're over leveraged as a country, other countries like China and India who lend get nervous and they want a higher rate of return, which means interest rates would pop. And that will change demand because you can't afford as much house as a buyer when you're paying a higher interest rate. And then on the supply side, you know, I don't see builders catching up so quickly. So the only question is, what happens when all these people who are on, you know, loan deferments, you know, when they call that in and all the foreclosures come, what's going to happen? Are the banks going to take that inventory when they foreclose it and flood the market with supply? Or are they going to do similar what they did in 2010, which was dribble them out slowly to prop up the market and get their money back with higher prices? My gut feeling is somewhere in the middle there. Some of them will flood, some of them will dribble. But I still don't think there's going to be enough properties that get foreclosed and turned around that flood the market and affect supply enough that it would be back to a normal level of supply. I just don't think it's enough. So I think that for the foreseeable future, as long as the economy is good, interest rates remain, you know, relatively low. I mean, they're really low right now, but, you know, 5% seems really high. But when you think in the scheme of things over 30, 40 years, that's still low. That's still a low interest rate. So as long as interest rates remain, I say below 5%, I think the market will stay. I don't know about at this pace, but it'll stay pretty strong.
Let me ask you this, Attorney Bronchick. What's your take on the affordability crisis and how that plays into the overall housing market? And what I mean by that is that, and this is just me kind of pontificating a little bit, but whenever this mortgage forbearance expires, and people probably can't even afford the houses that they're currently living in, let alone trying to move somewhere else because everywhere else has gone up. So do you see the affordability crisis kind of compelling people to take, let's just say, like going through chapter 13s or stalling out or gaming the system because they don't have anywhere else to go? And could that further exacerbate the inventory levels?
Well, I think that there's going to be a lot of that. That's a good point, but it's just delaying the inevitable. Eventually, you know, they're not going to pay on the 13 plan and they're going to get foreclosed. In terms of affordability, that's a good point. What we're seeing is, like in my city of Denver, the city of Denver lifted a ban on how many people unrelated could live in a house. So now what you're seeing is people doubling up, two families. So I think the opportunity is there for people who have mother-in-law apartments, two-family houses or big houses that are broken up where you can have two kitchens, two master bedrooms, up and down, and multiple families moving in for affordability. That's just going to be a new trend.
Okay, cool, very cool. And this, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but are you concerned about the millions of homeowners in mortgage forbearance, and what options do they have if they want to stay in their homes?
Good question. I am concerned about it. It's a large number, and the question is the solution when this deferment is over to A, work with homeowners on a some sort of basis of a forbearance or loan modification, B, tell them pay it up or we'll foreclose you, or C, some combination of there. And we really just don't know what's going to happen, because it depends on whether or not the government bails out the banks, for their losses on this, because they've been sitting on no payments for all this time, losing money. Will it affect the overall market? As I said earlier, I think to some extent, if they get foreclosed, there'll be new inventory back on the market. But I just don't know if it's enough to tip the scale of supply and demand.
Okay. What about the aspect of those individuals who don't escrow their mortgage payment? They're paying their taxes and insurance outside. Mm-hmm. So they may have, quote unquote, the mortgage in forbearance, but how does the taxes and insurance, aren't these folks possibly looking at a lump sum due whenever this thing is over with?
That's a good point, because if you're not escrowing and you're not paying your taxes, in most states, it's either your tax bill gets sold as a tax lien, and eventually the person who buys the tax lien will get a deed to your property free and clear, or like states like Texas, they have tax sales where the property's put up for auction for taxes. But if there's a mortgage, the mortgage company's going to pay that up. They're not going to get wiped out by a $5,000 tax bill or $10,000 tax bill. So there's that issue too. And back to what you said earlier, what are the options for a seller? Well, they could work with an investor like you or I. There's the opportunity to avoid foreclosure. Maybe do a subject to scenario where they deed it over to an investor. Investor makes up the back payments or works with the bank on a forbearance, and then continues making the payments going forward on the seller's loan, which would improve their credit because now it's back in place. It's not in default anymore. And to some people that sounds a little bizarre, but what's the alternative? Walk away and get foreclosed? Ruin your credit for 5 or 7 years? I mean, sometimes it's the lesser of two evils. Trust an investor to make your payments, or which could be a great win-win for everybody, or just let it go to the bank and get nothing out of it.
Yeah, you actually kind of touched on my next question. I was going to ask you, what does a foreclosure do to someone's credit?
It does a lot of damage. A foreclosure can do more damage than a bankruptcy. You can't get another loan with a bank for 3 years at least, Fannie Freddie, or FHA lets you get a new loan after 2 years, which is very surprising. But usually most lenders are 3 to 4 years before they'll give you a new loan after that. Whereas bankruptcy, you can get a new loan sooner because bankruptcy wipes everything out and gives you a clean slate. Whereas if you're in foreclosure and you got credit card bills that you owe and car payments, there's a big financial mess for the former homeowner.
Okay. And we touched a little bit on this earlier. We start talking about different exit strategies. So what's the difference between a short sale and a deed in lieu of foreclosure?
Great question. So a deed in lieu of foreclosure is where you give the property to the bank instead of them having to foreclose. And usually the bank is willing to waive any deficiency. So for example, if the house is worth 300 and the loan is 300, but the house went down to 250, now you're 50 upside down. The lender, in theory, in most states, can go after you for the $50,000 additional equity or loan that wasn't paid that's over the equity. So they're agreeing to waive that, and in some cases, they'll give you money. They'll give you cash, especially if you agree to vacate the property, with the deed in lieu, because it saves them attorney's fees, time. Remember, when a bank forecloses, they still have to evict the former owner when they can file bankruptcy and tie it up and trash the place and all that. So, it can be a win-win, but it's still a deed in lieu on your credit report is not a good thing either. The other scenario would be to do a short sale, which is altogether not great for your credit either, but better than a foreclosure, where you ask the bank to take less than they're owed and sell it to somebody for the amount of that discount. So, for example, if the house is worth $300 and you owe $400, it's upside down, and the investor, let's say, wants to buy it for $225. The investor is going to ask the bank to take $225 instead of $400 as a short. And that's not easy to do all the time, but it's doable. Banks do it. And in that case, the bank is not going to come after the homeowner for the difference.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. So for those who don't know, can you kind of give them an overview of what's the difference between a Chapter 7 versus a Chapter 13 bankruptcy?
Great question, because that's tied to a lot of these scenarios where people in foreclosure, they end up in bankruptcy. So Chapter 7 is a complete liquidation. You're giving up all your assets to a bankruptcy trustee, and basically the system is going to pay your creditors and take all your assets. Usually it's for someone who's upside down. They have more debt than assets. A Chapter 13 is a repayment plan. It's a forced repayment plan on your creditors. So, for example, if you lost the job, couldn't pay, and now you're working and you can pay, and the bank says, no, we're not going to work with you on a plan, then you file 13, and then you force a plan onto the creditors to pay monthly payments going forward, plus a little bit of the arrears over a 3 to 5 year period, and other creditors as well.
So if I wanted to keep my home, can I keep my home in a Chapter 7?
No, you lose the home in a 7, but you keep it in a 13. You keep making payments. In a 7, you're just stopping making payments, and eventually you're going to lose the house through foreclosure, because what happens is the filing of a Chapter 7 puts an order on everybody. It's called a stay, and the stay order says stop to all creditors. You can't do anything. The bank is going to do is march into federal bankruptcy court and ask the judge to exempt that stay so they could foreclose it, and the judge will usually allow them because they're secured. So, you're delaying the foreclosure, you're not getting rid of it.
Okay, so let's go back in time a little bit. Back in 2007, there was a widespread, I guess, things going on, let's say, with predatory lending. So can you explain what predatory lending is for those who don't know that, or what that's all about?
Right. So there were some circumstances where, let's say, a mortgage broker who was unethical would say to someone, I'll get you into a loan. It's not a good one, but don't worry, in a year I'll refinance you out into a better loan. And then after a year, that mortgage broker disappeared. That was an example of predatory lending. Getting people into loans they knew they couldn't afford. So they had payments where every time you made a payment, it was less than a regular payment, so your balance would go up. It's called a negative amortization loan. So instead of your balance going down, your balance is going up. But don't worry, the market's going up and you'll sell it in a few years and make money anyway. Or they had a teaser rate. So for the first year, it was only 1%. And then after that, it would adjust to market at 5%. And they couldn't make the payment. And the mortgage broker promised them a way out that they never got. So there's a lot of examples of that. And some really egregious things like falsifying documents, because we had a lot of what's called no doc loans, or no income verification, which means you just lie about what you make. And the mortgage broker would encourage someone who's not very sophisticated to lie on their documents. So we had a lot of that, and those loans went bad, which caused a ripple effect, because a lot of those loans were sold on Wall Street and in a pool of mortgages that investors paid for and lost money. Then the banks lost money, the homeowners lost homes, everybody lost on that one. We don't have that in our scenario now. We don't have that scenario. Banks are still requiring 20% down, proof of income. It's still pretty strict to get a loan, so I don't see that scenario now.
Okay. What about, is there any possibilities in our current lending environment? Let's say, I'm calling this kind of like an inflated interest rate. And what I mean by that is that, can you, let's say through a mortgage audit, come up and find out after the fact that given my credit and income and whatever the prevailing, let's say 30-year interest rate was for that market, my rate should have been here, but you found out that you were charged this instead.
Right.
Would that be construed as predatory lending?
It actually isn't. It's just not a thing that most people disclose. So let's say a mortgage broker was going to sell you a loan. So what they do is they go to their wholesale lenders and they get a rate sheet. And the rate sheet, says for this person, qualifications is 3.5%. And that mortgage broker goes to the customer and says 4%. That 0.5% over 30 years is a lot of money. So the lender kicks back the mortgage broker the profit or part of that profit for the extra interest. And you don't know this because it's not really disclosed really clearly on the closing documents. It's called a yield spread premium. So if you're a consumer, ask your mortgage broker, what's the yield spread premium or what's the markup you're making on this? Now, it's not that they're not entitled to make a profit, but you just want to know what you're being charged.
If someone requires or asks for that, is the loan officer required to disclose that to them? They have to by law?
Absolutely. Okay. But most people just don't know to ask.
This is true. I was back in the mortgage industry back like in 2005 and 2006. And, sometimes there's all kind of ways around, they call it the HUD back then, where you can squeeze that YSP.
YSP. The line on the HUD was YSP POC. What does that mean? Yield spread premium paid out of closing to the mortgage broker.
If somebody felt they were the victim of predatory lender or RESPA violation, who should they contact?
Well, they can make a complaint with their state attorney general's consumer fraud division, or they can, it may not be worth it for one borrower, but they can hire a consumer advocate attorney and sue the lender. Usually those are class action suits. So it's expensive to do. I would go to the state regulatory agencies and deal with them.
Okay. And do you have any experience, or could you tell my students what a mortgage audit is?
Mm-hmm. So mortgage companies do loans. They have to comply with federal regulations and state regulations. So once in a while, the state or feds come in and audit and make sure that the loan was underwritten properly. There was no misstatements. There was no funny business in the loan, and all the regulations were complied with about disclosures to the consumer, to the lender who bought the loan from them, and so forth.
Okay. If someone through a mortgage audit or hired an outside company or an attorney to do a mortgage audit and they found something that wasn't in compliance, could that potentially be used as leverage if you're trying to negotiate new terms and conditions with your lender?
You mean after the loan or before the loan?
After the loan.
It's difficult because you're negotiating against the big beast.
Gotcha.
And it's probably easier to go to the state authorities, and then hopefully they have multiple complaints. They take action against the lender. They get a settlement, and they distribute checks. Just recently, believe it or not, I had about $3,000 worth of check refunds from Countrywide, which doesn't exist anymore. From loans that I did 15 years ago that the lawsuit went on with the state for years and just settled. And I got a couple, I had 3 or 4 Countrywide loans that I got checks for, totaling about $3,000.
Wow, yeah, you're dating yourself now, brother. Didn't Bank of America take over Countrywide?
Yes, they did. Yes,
and they took all that toxic loans with it. And that
Countrywide had a lot of toxic loans.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit now, attorney, about my DIY course, loan modification, and why I came up with that. I personally, just for disclosure purposes, back in 2005. I wasn't familiar with mitigation departments or what my options were when I got behind on payments. And as a result, I lost my home in 2005. And I got foreclosed on because I didn't know anything about loan options, debt settlement, how to reach out to lenders. A lot of homeowners who are facing this problem right now quite frankly, just scared and don't want to pick up the phone. There's something, you probably have clients like that, just psychologically.
Fear of the unknown. They put their head in the sand like an ostrich and hope the problem will go away, but you got to be proactive, and great service you offer people to get them educated as to what the process may be.
I'm going to kind of give you kind of like some bullet points on why I think this is somewhat of a competitive product that I'm offering. Because when I started to do research, Attorney Bronchick, about this loan modification, I've seen some here and there, but I didn't see anyone coming up with I'm just going to call this a holistic approach to loan modification, because my students, as I tell them throughout the course, that almost 90% of the folks who are lucky enough to get a loan modification default within the first 90 days.
Yeah.
So part of my course, Attorney Bronchick, was to come up with a do-it-yourself credit repair course, debt management, debt negotiations. Because if you're dealing with let's say a displaced income, or your income has been impacted because of COVID, maybe you have $1,000 going out towards creditors, but if you can renegotiate that, maybe cut that down to $500, that increases your disposable income and thereby putting you in a better position to maybe get a loan modification approved. So in summary, I just didn't see a lot of people out there hitting it from those angles, because if you need a loan modification, you probably got credit issues and you probably have debt issues. So all of those things need to be addressed if you want to set yourself up for success in the future. So can you kind of tell somebody, give them kind of a legal definition of what a loan modification is and the purpose of it?
Yes, and that's, by the way, a great idea what you're doing there, and a great service to people. A lot of people don't qualify for loan mods because they have to demonstrate to the bank they can make the payment. And if they have all these other credit card payments on top of their mortgage payments, they may not be able to qualify for one. So by squeezing down the other payments, leaving more for the lender, you're increasing their odds dramatically, and that's a great thing. So a loan modification is when you ask the lender to modify the terms of the original note. Sometimes they'll do it permanently for the rest of the loan, sometimes temporarily, like over 3 to 5 years. They'll drop the interest rate from 5 to 2 for a couple of years to get you back on your feet, and then it goes back up to 5 where it was. And if there's any additional interest, sometimes they'll waive it, and sometimes they'll add it as principal on the back of the loan, so it makes your loan a little bit longer. But still, what you're looking at is now, solving the problem now, getting this loan back into operation so you can continue and keep your home.
Okay. Attorney, why do you think so many people, let's just say, get denied a loan modification? What are some of the pitfalls or some of the problems that the average homeowners are facing when they're trying to get a loan modification?
Right. Yeah, it is. The chances of a loan modification on your own without the knowledge that you have are pretty slim to none. I remember reading at one point that Countrywide at the peak was only doing 5% approvals on loan modifications. That's crazy. So the one word I could say is stamina, because they're going to paper you down and they're going to ask for things, and then they'll say they didn't get it. Whether they're lying or not, I don't know. But just be prepared for just a long road of paperwork being filled out and follow up. And the more knowledge you have about the process and what they're likely to approve, the more likely you're going to get it done. So get educated and be very persistent.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I just had a student email me over the weekend who has an FHA, and it says, well, I don't really want to do a loan modification. This is after they signed up for the course. They say, well, I want to do a short sale. And I says, well, that's fine and dandy, but there's something in FHA called the waterfall process. So you have to go through loan modification review even before they're going to allow you to go down the road for a short sale.
That's correct.
Okay, so you specialize in creative real estate investing. You have programs that can teach people how to buy real estate, even with bad credit, right?
Right.
So someone could, practically speaking, go through my course, hopefully follow my instructions, hopefully secure a loan modification, and then based on some of the things that you teach, can actually put themselves in a position to become an investor after they take care of their primary residence. One of the techniques you are famous for is called subject to. So can you kind of explain some of the creativity around owning and acquiring investing even without, let's just say, A1 credit or limited funds?
Right. So subject to is someone who deeds you the property. You don't assume the mortgage with the bank formally. You just take ownership and make payments on the seller's loan. Now, the seller is usually someone like we're talking about here who can't get a loan mod or tried and couldn't do a short sale. They have a little bit of equity maybe, but they have a very low interest rate. So as a buyer, you would buy that property, make up the back payments, and continue making going forward, which is a favor for the seller because they're going to get foreclosed anyway. It's a good deal for you because you're not asking the bank to qualify you with your credit, your income, and everything. You're just taking over the payments. Now, in theory, the lender has the right to accelerate or call that loan due if you transfer it without their permission, but it just rarely, I mean, in 30 years, I've seen it happen twice, because the reason for that right the lender has is when interest rates go up to 13%, like they did in 81, and if it was a 4% loan, of course they're going to force you to pay it off because they're losing money. But these days, interest rates are pretty stable or flat or falling. So if they have a loan that's not being paid and now it's being paid, they're not going to question who's paying it. So it's a great deal for you as a buyer because you don't have to show your credit, you don't have to qualify, you don't have to show income, and in many cases you don't have to put much down, just enough to make up the back payments and maybe give the seller a little walking money.
Do you see creative financing and things like subject to being a more prevalent way of acquiring property moving forward in the environment that we're in right now?
Absolutely. Not just investors, but people who were in foreclosure and now can't qualify for a loan for a while. This is a good way to buy a home as a homeowner. So for example, what we see is a situation where someone had, let's say, an $800,000 home, way over leveraged. They lost their job because of COVID or whatever, and now they can't afford it. So they do a short sale, or they got out of foreclosure, and now they're kind of out of the system of being able to get a loan for a while. They could downsize to a $500,000 house and take over someone's payments who's in the same scenario they were 6 months ago.
Awesome. So if someone was behind on their payments and they, let's say, had decent income and they wanted to prevent foreclosure and they wanted to stay in the home, would you recommend them looking at a loan modification?
Absolutely. The first thing you want to do is communicate with your lender. If you go dark, they're just going to assume the worst and they're going to start foreclosing. So the best thing you can do is communicate with your lender, try to work it out. They're going to be difficult, I'll be honest. They're going to be tough. They're going to require a lot of paperwork, but it's worth it. If you can negotiate something, it's a win-win where they drop your interest rate, maybe take your payments that you're behind. Let's say you're behind $10,000 and you just don't have it, and get them to stick it on the back of the loan as principal, right? And then drop your interest rate so you can start making payments going forward at a lower payment. That's a win-win for everyone. They don't want the house back. They want to make loans.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, they just want to convert you from a non-performing asset to a performing asset. The bank doesn't want your house.
Right. Federal regulators look at their default rate. And if their default rate gets too high, then the feds can come in and shut down their loan programs.
Awesome.
They don't want that.
So if someone wanted to, let's say, get some more information about how to acquire a house without it showing up on my credit, low money, all these creative techniques that you teach and you're an author of, how would they go about contacting you and getting that information?
Yeah, they can go to my website at legalwiz.com. It's W-I-Z, no H, legalwiz.com. And should we give them a code to get a discount on any of my educational products?
Sure.
What do you want to give them? Come up with a code real quick.
DIY 2021.
DIY 2021. All right. We're going to put a coupon code in there when you check out. DIY 2021. We'll get them 30% off.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to my students and to speak to me about not only the loan modification process, but just the overall landscape of what the housing market looks like and offering your expertise. I will finally leave you with, if you want to throw out any closing thoughts or any remarks that you have, I'll give you the last word, attorney.
Yeah, the most important I can say thing is get educated, be proactive, and be persistent at this. Not a lot of people succeed at loan mods because they don't know what they're doing and they give up. They give up because the bank keeps asking for paperwork and more and the same things, and they go, oh, I can't do this. Be persistent. Learn what to do. Be persistent. Talk to them. Communicate with them. It's doable if you know what you're doing, you learn the process, and you be persistent.
I do have one final question. I will let you go. I don't know if you can answer this or not. What do you think, or do you know what the average cost is? Let's say someone wanted to hire someone or an attorney
Right.
to help them with a loan modification?
Attorneys charge quite a bit for loan mods. The fees are all over the place. Attorney's going to be your most expensive and not necessarily your best bet. There's some non-attorney services out there that will do it. Just be careful, ask around, check the Better Business Bureau, Google them, because there's a lot of scam artists who will take your money and promise the world and get nothing.
Yeah. So just so you know, we offer the course, $297. It's 30-day unconditional money back guarantee. I've been in business for 15 years. I don't know if you've done any research on me. I am registered with the Better Business Bureau, but more importantly, we've got a network of attorneys that we work with. So anyone who is lucky enough to get a loan modification will have a licensed real estate attorney in their prospective state review the documents. And I tell students all the time, the reason why that's important, because sometimes lenders will slip in language on a loan modification and you find yourself waiving some consumer rights in the process of getting a new deal.
That's a very good point, to have an attorney. And by the way, I said about using attorneys, even though they might be a little pricier. Attorneys are not going to scam you for a few $100. Right. They have a license to practice law, and that's golden. So, if they charge you X dollars, they're not going to run away with your money like a non-attorney might, right? So they have the hand of Big Brother, the State Bar, watching over them. They're not going to scam people for a few $100.
Great. Well, Attorney Bronchick, once again, it's really an honor to talk to you. It's my pleasure. I look forward to working with you and learning from you in the future. And once again, I want to thank you on behalf of my company and my students for participating in this DIY loan modification Q&A.
Sure. My pleasure.
Take care. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.